Across the fields of Burkina Faso, a machine built in a local workshop is doing something that would have sounded remarkable not long ago. According to one farmer who uses it, work that could require about 20 people laboring for 10 days can, under his conditions, be completed by the machine in a single day. But the most important question is not how fast the machine moves. The question is who built it. This is a Poega Korgho machine created in Burkina Faso by Haj Issouf Korgho, a self-taught craftsman who never received a formal education and cannot read or write. Yet, after decades of observation, failure, experimentation, and practical work, he learned how to build agricultural machines designed around the needs of farmers in his own country. That raises a much bigger question for Africa. What happens when a country stops thinking only about how many machines it can import and begins asking how many of those machines it can understand, repair, improve, and eventually manufacture for itself? That distinction matters because buying a machine is not the same as controlling the technology behind it. Imported equipment can bring enormous benefits, but it can also leave farmers dependent on outside suppliers for engines, spare parts, specialized repairs, and replacement equipment. Korgho offers another possibility. The farmer can speak directly to the builder. The builder can watch the machine work, hear what needs improvement, return to his workshop, and modify the equipment for local conditions. Today, that small workshop also fits into a much larger national debate. Under President Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso has placed food sovereignty, agricultural mechanization, local processing, and domestic productive capacity near the center of its development agenda. Traore did not create Korgho, and there is no reliable evidence that his government is responsible for Korgho's inventions. Korgho's journey began long before Traore came to power, but their stories now intersect around one powerful idea. Burkina Faso should not only consume what others manufacture, it should progressively build the knowledge and productive capacity to make more for itself. And if you want to follow stories about how Africans are trying to turn sovereignty from a political slogan into something people can actually build, repair, and use, stay with this channel because the story of one machine in Burkina Faso may ultimately be about something much larger than farming. It may be about who gets to build Africa's future. Issouf Korgho did not begin his journey inside a university laboratory or a modern engineering company. His education began with a machine that turned grain into flour. Originally from Tenkodogo, Korgho moved to Ouagadougou decades ago and found work operating a grain mill. Day after day, he watched cereal grains enter the machine and emerge transformed. Instead of simply accepting what the machine did, he became fascinated by how it worked. That curiosity gradually changed his life. He began learning how to repair the mill. Then he studied its mechanical parts through observation and practice, paying particular attention to gears and the way movement could be transferred through a machine. Eventually, repairing equipment was no longer enough. Korgho wanted to build machines himself. The transition was anything but easy. Korgho has explained that during his early years, he might build 5 machines and see only one work successfully. The other 4 represented wasted materials, wasted money, and many hours of labor. But he kept starting again. That detail matters because it changes the meaning of his story. Korgho's machines were not produced by some mysterious natural genius. They came from persistence, repeated failure, practical experimentation, and years spent understanding mechanical problems with his own hands. Over time, his workshop began producing equipment for farmers, livestock producers, and food processors. These included grain threshers, grinders, livestock feed machines, equipment for processing shea products, and machines capable of handling several different crops. His creations eventually carried the Poega Korgho name, and behind that name was a simple philosophy. A machine should respond to the work people actually need to perform. That philosophy would become particularly important in rural Burkina Faso, where farmers often handle several crops rather than building their livelihood around only one. Korgho had learned to make machines. The next question was more important. Could those machines prove their value when they left the workshop and entered a real farm? To answer that, we have to meet the farmers who actually put them to work. The real test of any agricultural machine does not happen inside a workshop. It happens in the field, where farmers measure success in hours saved, harvest processed, and physical labor avoided. That is where Amado Bugumpinga enters the story. Bugumpinga spent more than 20 years working in accounting before eventually committing himself fully to farming. Today, he operates a farm of roughly 64 acres near Kuala, outside Ouagadougou. His experience taught him that ambition alone cannot overcome one of agriculture's oldest problems, demanding work combined with limited labor. For him, mechanization became a necessity. Bugumpinga reported that a locally manufactured Korgho machine could process more than 100 bags of unpeeled corn in a day, with each bag weighing roughly 220 pounds. That represents more than 11 US tons of material. When the corn is prepared before entering the machine, he said daily output can exceed 200 bags. His most striking comparison was even simpler. According to Bugumpinga, the machine could accomplish in one day what 20 people might otherwise need 10 days to complete. Another agricultural producer, Leon Badiara, described a similar experience with Korgho's equipment. Badiara reported harvesting about 7 metric tons of sorghum, approximately 7.7 US ton. According to his account, Korgho's machine completed the threshing between 11 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. These figures come from users describing their own experiences. They should not be confused with independent laboratory tests conducted under standardized conditions. But that distinction does not make their experiences meaningless. For a farmer facing a harvest, the difference between several days of difficult manual work and several hours of mechanized processing can affect labor costs, timing, physical strain, and their ability to handle larger production. And this reveals the first real value of the Poega Korgho story. It is not the label made in Burkina Faso by itself. It is the possibility of giving farmers something they can never recover once it has been lost. Time, but speed alone does not explain why these farmers value locally built machines. The next part of the story is about something imported equipment cannot always provide so easily: direct access to the person who built it. A locally built machine has another advantage that cannot be measured simply by counting how many bags of grain it processes in an hour. The person who made it may be close enough to listen. Korgho describes his machines as multi-purpose equipment. Instead of designing a thresher around only one crop, his polyserial machine was built to handle several crops commonly grown in Burkina Faso, including corn, rice, millet, sorghum, soybeans, and cowpeas. His multi-purpose grinder follows the same philosophy, processing crop residues that can be used for livestock feed, silage, compost, and other purposes. But adaptability becomes even more important when farmers begin requesting changes. Amado Bugumpinga provides a revealing example. After using Korgho's equipment, he wanted a modification to the way processed forage left the grinder. Korgho changed the machine so the chopped material could be discharged upward with enough force to load it more conveniently onto a truck. That creates a remarkably short feedback loop. The farmer identifies a problem, the manufacturer hears it directly, the workshop modifies the equipment, then the machine returns to the field. With imported equipment, that relationship can be more complicated. The manufacturer may be thousands of miles away, and the local farmer may have little influence over how the next version is designed. This does not mean a Burkina-made machine is completely independent of foreign technology. Korgho himself has acknowledged that he imports engines while manufacturing other parts of his machines locally. That is an important limitation. Burkina Faso has not suddenly created an entirely self-contained agricultural machinery industry, but complete independence is not the only measure of progress. A more practical question is how many parts of the technological chain a country can gradually control. Can local workers understand the machine? Can they repair it? Can they manufacture parts? Can they modify the design when farmers need something different? Every additional capability reduces one layer of vulnerability, and that leads to a deeper meaning of self-reliance. It is not necessarily about building every nut, bolt, and engine inside one country's borders. It is about increasing the amount of knowledge and control that remains close to the people who depend on the machine. But local repair and local adaptation reveal only part of the larger challenge. Burkina Faso still operates inside an international machinery supply chain. Tractors, engines, spare parts, fuel, industrial materials, and specialized components can cross borders before a farmer ever turns the key. That means dependence cannot be understood simply as a contest between Burkina Faso and the West. Trade data we examine makes that especially clear. In 2024, Burkina Faso imported 787 tractors in the category studied. Of those, 757 came from China. Others came from countries including India, and in much smaller numbers, European suppliers. So the real issue is broader than replacing European equipment with equipment from somewhere else. If one foreign supplier is replaced by another, while the country still cannot maintain, reproduce, or adapt essential technology, the underlying vulnerability may remain. Consider what happens after an imported machine is purchased. Who supplies the replacement part when something breaks? Who understands the engine? How long must the farmer wait? How much foreign currency is required? And can a local mechanic modify the equipment when conditions in Burkina Faso demand something the original manufacturer never anticipated? This is where the idea of control becomes more important than simple ownership. A farmer can own a machine and still depend heavily on a distant supply chain to keep it running. By contrast, when more of the knowledge needed to fabricate, maintain, and repair equipment exists locally, a larger share of that control remains inside the country. That does not mean imports are bad. A reliable foreign engine may be better than an unreliable local one. Burkina Faso can benefit from international technology, investment, and expertise. The objective should not be isolation. The stronger objective is resilience. Import what makes sense today while developing the skills to repair more tomorrow. Assemble what can be assembled locally. Manufacture the parts that local workshops can produce competitively. Train technicians. Improve designs. Gradually move further up the technological chain. And this is where a small workshop in Ouagadougou begins to intersect with a much larger political project. Because under Ibrahim Traore, the language of producing more inside Burkina Faso has moved directly into national policy. Now the story reaches Ibrahim Traore, but one distinction is essential. Traore did not create Poega Korgho. Korgho had been developing agricultural machinery long before Traore came to power, and there is no reliable evidence that Traore personally financed or directed his inventions. The connection is something larger. Under Traore, Burkina Faso has made food sovereignty, agricultural mechanization, local processing, and domestic production prominent parts of its national development agenda. That commitment has been backed by significant public spending. In 2024, the government reported mobilizing agricultural equipment and inputs worth more than 78 billion CFA francs, roughly 130 million US dollars at approximate exchange rates. The package included 400 tractors, hundreds of smaller cultivators, and hundreds of motor pumps. The effort expanded in 2025. Authorities reported agricultural equipment and inputs worth more than 104 billion CFA francs, approximately 170 million US dollars. That program included 608 tractors, 1,102 smaller cultivators, 485 motor pumps, and additional harvesting and processing equipment. Those numbers show that mechanization is no longer being treated simply as an individual farmer's concern. It has become part of a national effort to increase agricultural production. Traore has also repeatedly emphasized another objective. Burkina Faso should process more of what it produces and develop greater productive capacity inside the country. That is where Korgho becomes symbolically important. The government can purchase hundreds of machines to increase production quickly, but purchasing equipment and developing the capacity to manufacture equipment are two different stages of economic power. A nation seeking food sovereignty must therefore confront a difficult question. If Burkina Faso needs more tractors, threshers, grinders, pumps, and processing equipment every year, how much of that machinery can eventually be designed, assembled, maintained, and manufactured by Burkinabe workers themselves? Korgho does not provide a complete answer. His workshop is still small, and some essential components remain imported. But his work demonstrates that local mechanical knowledge already exists. The challenge for Traore's vision is whether Burkina Faso can transform examples like this from isolated achievement into lasting industrial capacity. Because sovereignty is strongest when a country can do more than purchase the tools of development. It can help build them. A nation cannot build an agricultural machinery industry around one talented inventor. That may be the most important lesson hidden inside Korgho's success. His workshop proves that practical engineering knowledge exists in Burkina Faso, but moving from a successful workshop to an industry capable of supplying thousands of farmers requires an entire ecosystem. There are already signs of what that ecosystem could look like. Agricultural machinery specialists from Burkina Faso's research institutions have worked with Korgho's enterprise to evaluate and improve equipment. Their role includes examining productivity, operation, energy consumption, and the actual capacity of machines so users can better understand what the equipment can deliver. Students have also entered Korgho's workshop for practical training. One example is Leaticia Yameogo, who learned metalworking, assembly, and machine fabrication during her training there. Her work eventually included building a cassava peeling machine. That relationship matters. An experienced craftsman transfers practical knowledge to a student. Technical specialists help evaluate the machinery. Farmers test the equipment under real conditions and report problems. The workshop uses those observations to improve its designs. That is much closer to an industrial system than the story of a lone inventor working in isolation. But there is still a major obstacle: scale. In 2022, Korgho said that during one period, he needed to produce between 1,000 and 1,500 corn processing machines to satisfy orders, while also facing demand for other equipment. His workshop simply did not have enough materials and financial resources to meet that demand. This exposes the next challenge for Burkina Faso. Proving that one person can build a useful machine is one achievement. Building thousands of reliable machines with consistent standards, replacement parts, trained technicians, financing, and dependable supply chains is something much larger. That requires vocational schools, research centers, metal suppliers, banks, manufacturers, quality standards, farmers, and government policy to begin working as part of the same system. The future of Poega Korgho, therefore, may not depend only on how many machines Issouf Korgho can personally build. The bigger question is how many people Burkina Faso can teach to build, test, maintain, and improve machines after him. That is how an invention becomes an industry. But mechanization creates a difficult question that cannot be ignored. If one machine can perform work that once required 20 people, what happens to those 20 workers? For countries with young and rapidly growing populations, this question matters. Agricultural modernization cannot be judged only by how much labor a machine eliminates. It must also be judged by whether the economy creates more productive opportunities for the people whose work is changing. In Bugumpinga's case, the immediate problem is not an excess of workers. He has said that agricultural labor can be difficult to find. Mechanization allows his farm to complete physically demanding work faster and with fewer people. But if machines like these spread across Burkina Faso, the long-term opportunity should be larger than simply replacing manual labor. Someone must operate the machines. Someone must repair them. Someone must fabricate replacement parts, weld frames, transport equipment, process larger harvests, and manage rental services that allow smaller farmers to use machinery without purchasing an entire machine themselves. Korgho's own workshop provides a small example. In 2022, his enterprise reported employing 7 people permanently and another 25 workers on a contract basis. That is an important reminder. Machines can eliminate certain kinds of work while creating demand for different kinds of work. The challenge is making sure workers have a path from low productivity manual labor toward better paid technical and industrial skills. Affordability presents another problem. A small farmer may recognize the value of mechanization and still be unable to purchase a machine. That is why shared ownership, cooperatives, financing, or equipment rental services could become important solutions. The evidence we examine does not establish that any one of these models is already widespread across Burkina Faso, so they should be understood as possibilities rather than proven national solutions. The larger principle remains clear. A successful machinery revolution should not be measured only by how many workers a machine can replace. It should also be measured by how many more productive jobs can grow around that machine. If Burkina Faso can connect agricultural mechanization with technical training, repair services, manufacturing, processing, and local enterprise, then one machine replacing manual labor could become the beginning of an entirely new chain of economic activity. And that possibility does not stop at Burkina Faso's borders. The story of Poega Korgho may have started in Burkina Faso, but the question it raises is much larger than one country. Could locally adapted agricultural machinery become part of a broader strategy across the Sahel? Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are already building closer political and economic cooperation through the Alliance of Sahel States. Their leaders, Ibrahim Traore, Assimi Goïta, and Abdurrahmane Chiani, have repeatedly placed sovereignty at the center of their regional message. Agriculture offers a practical test of what that sovereignty could mean. These countries do not need identical machines. Farmers in different regions face different soils, crops, climates, and production conditions. But they can potentially share something more valuable: technical knowledge. Imagine a machine developed in Burkina Faso being tested under farming conditions in Mali. Engineers and farmers could identify weaknesses, improve the design, and then adapt another version for conditions in Niger. A regional network could eventually share training, repair knowledge, technical standards, and selected replacement parts. There is no evidence that Poega Korgho itself has become an official Alliance of Sahel States machinery program. It would be misleading to claim that it has. The importance of the example is what it suggests could become possible. African self-reliance does not require every African country to manufacture everything alone. A stronger model would allow countries to specialize, trade with one another, exchange technical knowledge, and gradually keep a greater share of manufacturing, maintenance, processing, and economic value within Africa. For the Sahel, that could turn regional cooperation into something farmers can actually see and use. Not another declaration, not another slogan, a machine that works, a replacement part that can be found nearby, a technician trained within the region, and a farmer who does not have to look thousands of miles away every time something breaks. But before calling that a revolution, one final question must be confronted. What do the critics say, and where does the promise of self-reliance meet its limits? Before we call this an African industrial revolution, we should confront the strongest objections. Western criticism of Ibrahim Traore's government is real. European institutions and Western media have raised serious concerns about civil liberties, human rights, political freedoms, and Burkina Faso's changing geopolitical relationships. Those concerns should not be disguised as opposition to agricultural machinery. There is no credible evidence that France, the European Union, or the West is trying to prevent Burkina Faso from building Poega Korgho machines. In fact, European institutions, the World Bank, and other international organizations have continued supporting development and agricultural programs in Burkina Faso. So the real debate is more complicated than Africa against the West. Burkina Faso has every legitimate reason to seek greater economic control, but self-reliance must also survive honest scrutiny. Korgho still imports engines. Burkina Faso remains exposed to imported fuel, fertilizer, industrial materials, and other technologies. Farmers still face financing and water constraints. A successful workshop is not yet a national manufacturing industry. These limitations do not destroy the idea of self-reliance. They define the work still ahead. The lesson for Africa is not to manufacture everything immediately or reject useful foreign technology. It is to begin with real problems, develop local solutions, test them, listen to users, improve the designs, train workers, establish standards, and gradually expand production. That lesson matters beyond Burkina Faso. Whether people follow African news, debate the future of the African Union, watch Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso, Assimi Goïta in Mali, or Abdurrahmane Chiani in Niger, the deeper question across West Africa and the Sahel remains the same. How much of Africa's future will Africans have the capacity to build themselves? That question should not require hostility toward France or any other country. Cooperation can remain valuable when it transfers knowledge and expands African capability rather than creating permanent dependence. And that brings us back to Issouf Korgho. One self-taught craftsman in Ouagadougou cannot transform an entire continent. But his machine demonstrates something tangible. A problem existed. An African studied it. He built a solution. Farmers used it. They suggested improvements. He returned to the workshop and made it better. If thousands of young technicians across Africa could enter that same cycle of learning, building, failing, improving, and producing, imagine what could follow. If you believe those stories deserve attention, follow this channel and share your view. Because real self-reliance does not begin with a slogan. It begins when someone learns how to build. We sincerely appreciate your time and support. Every video on this channel is carefully researched, thoughtfully written, and meticulously edited by our dedicated team. We don't rely on automated production or shortcuts to create our content. Every story, every visual, and every detail is crafted with genuine care, passion, and a commitment to bringing you meaningful, high-quality videos.